He slid the pregnancy test across his desk like it was a business document he had already reviewed. Not surprise, not shock, just the flat certainty of a man who had already decided what the outcome would be. Amara Whitfield stood on the other side of that desk, her hands still trembling from holding the test 20 minutes ago in the bathroom of his penthouse, and she watched the most feared man in Seoul look at the proof of her pregnancy with the calm expression of someone who had been waiting for exactly this moment. "I already knew," Kang Min-jae said. She thought she had misheard him. The words didn't land right. They didn't make sense in the order he had said them. "What?" He looked up at her then, those dark eyes that she had spent months learning to read, the eyes she thought she understood. "I made sure this happened," he said, "because I couldn't lose you." The room went silent in a way that had nothing to do with sound. If you have ever loved someone and then discovered that everything you thought was real had been arranged without your knowledge, stay with this story. Because what happens next will make you question everything you thought you knew about love, control, and the price of a man's fear. Like this video, if it already has you feeling something. Drop your city or country in the comments right now. I want to see how far this story has traveled. Subscribe if you haven't yet, and keep watching. Because what Amara does next, and what Min-jae is forced to face, is going to stay with you long after this ends. Amara Whitfield had never been the kind of woman who needed saving. She had grown up in Atlanta, the middle child of a schoolteacher mother and a father who drove long-haul trucks 6 days a week and came home smelling like diesel and exhaustion. There was no money for mistakes in that house. There was no room for softness that didn't have a purpose. Her mother used to say, "You want the world to take you seriously? You have to be twice as prepared and half as loud." Amara had taken that instruction and built a career out of it. By 26, she was running brand campaigns for mid-sized companies in New York. By 28, she had burned out spectacularly, left a job she'd given 4 years to, and ended a relationship with a man who had told her she was too focused on work to be a real partner. She had packed 2 suitcases, sublet her apartment in Brooklyn, and accepted a contract position with a consulting firm that had just opened a Seoul office. It wasn't bravery, it was survival instinct dressed up as ambition. Seoul swallowed her whole in the best possible way. The city moved at a pace that matched something inside her. The work was demanding, the culture was demanding. Nobody had any patience for mediocrity, and that suited her perfectly because she had none either. She worked 12-hour days. She learned enough Korean to stop embarrassing herself in meetings. She built a reputation inside of 8 months as the woman who could walk into a struggling brand narrative and find the exact thread to pull. That reputation is what put her in the same room as Kang Min-jae. She had been told, before the meeting, that he was a powerful investor with interests across multiple sectors. That was the language his people used. The reality was something nobody said out loud. Min-jae's family had run Gangnam's underground economy for 3 generations. What had started as loan sharking and territory protection had evolved, under his direction, into something far more sophisticated. Private equity, real estate, international logistics. The criminal infrastructure was still there, buried so deep beneath legitimate business that most people who worked for his companies had no idea what was underneath. Amara did not know this on the day she walked into the glass-walled conference room on the 42nd floor of the Kang Holdings building. She knew it 6 weeks later when one of her colleagues pulled her aside at a company dinner and explained very quietly that their biggest client was not simply a businessman. By then, she was already in trouble. Not because of fear, because she had already started looking forward to every meeting with him. The first time they sat across a table, Min-jae had asked her to walk him through her brand repositioning strategy for one of his hotel chains. She had prepared a 40-minute presentation. He stopped her at minute 8. "This section," he said, tapping a single slide. "Why did you lead with the heritage angle instead of the experience angle?" She had looked at him, not flustered, not impressed, just honest. "Because your target demographic has money and no patience for novelty," she said. "They've seen every curated experience pitch from every luxury brand in Asia. Heritage is the only angle that doesn't feel like a sales tactic." He was quiet for a moment. Then he said, "Continue." That was it. No compliment. No acknowledgement that she'd answered correctly. Just permission to proceed. Any other person in that room might have found it dismissive. Amara found it oddly respectful. He wasn't performing interest. He was either interested or he wasn't, and right now he was. She continued. By minute 38, he had asked 4 more questions, each one sharper than the last, each one revealing that he had read her materials more thoroughly than she'd expected. When she finished, he thanked her in a way that was brief and entirely genuine, and the meeting was over. She walked out thinking about the questions. She did not let herself think about anything else. That restraint lasted about 3 weeks. It was a Tuesday evening, late, when she was still in the office because she had a deliverable due at 7 a.m., and the numbers weren't connecting the way she needed them to. The floor was mostly empty. The overhead lights had gone to half power. She was eating cold convenience store rice and staring at her laptop when she heard footsteps in the corridor and looked up to find Kang Min-jae standing in the doorway of the open office. He was not in his usual suit. Dark slacks, a simple black shirt, no tie. He looked like a different version of himself, less constructed. "You're still here," he said. Not a question. "Deadline," she said. He looked at the rice container. "That's from the GS25 on the corner." "Yes." "The rice there is terrible." "I know." She picked up her chopsticks. "But it's close." Something shifted in his expression. Not a smile exactly. Something smaller. He turned and left without another word. She went back to her screen. 20 minutes later, he reappeared in the doorway with 2 containers from the Korean barbecue place 3 blocks away. He set one on her desk without comment and sat down in the chair across from her with the other. "You don't have to—" she started. "I was hungry," he said. She looked at him. He looked at his food. She let it go. They ate in silence for a few minutes. Then, for reasons she could not fully explain later, she said, "Can I ask you something?" "You're going to regardless." "The heritage angle," she said. "You already knew that before I walked in, didn't you?" He didn't answer immediately. He was quiet in the specific way of someone choosing their words with the same care they would use handling something fragile. "I had a theory," he said. "I wanted to hear your reasoning." "Why?" He looked up at her. "Because the reasoning matters more than the conclusion." She held his gaze for a moment longer than was professionally appropriate. Then she went back to her food. That was the beginning. Not dramatic, not cinematic. Just 2 people in an empty office eating takeout, and something fragile and unnamed starting to exist between them. Over the following months, that something grew in the spaces between work. He started asking for her directly on projects, bypassing the usual channel of going through the consulting firm. She told herself it was professional respect. Her colleagues told her, in various degrees of subtlety, that it was something else. She deflected every comment with the ease of a woman who had spent years being underestimated and had learned to keep her interior life armored. Min-jae was not subtle, but he was not direct either. He was careful. Everything he did existed in a space between professional and personal where no line had been clearly drawn, which meant no line could clearly be crossed. He remembered things. That was the part that got her. She had mentioned once, offhandedly, that she missed her grandmother's sweet potato pie. 2 weeks later, there was a small box on her desk from an American bakery in Itaewon that had a version of it. No note, just the box. She knew it was him because nobody else had been in that conversation. She did not thank him directly. She sent him a work email that included one line at the bottom that had nothing to do with the project. The pie was close. Not quite right, but close. His reply came back in under 10 minutes. It was a work response, thorough and professional. The last line read, "Noted. I'll find a better source." That was how they communicated for months. In the margins. In the negative space. Until one evening in March, when he walked her to the car after a late project debrief and, standing in the cold of the parking structure with no one else around, kissed her in a way that did not feel like a first kiss at all. It felt like a conversation they had already been having for a long time. She pulled back first. He waited. "This is complicated," she said. "Yes," he agreed. "You know my situation. I'm contracted. My visa is tied to the firm." "I know." "And you're—" She didn't finish the sentence. They both knew what the end of it was. "Yes," he said again. "Just that." She looked at him in the dark of the parking structure. The cold came off the concrete floors. She could see her own breath. "I need to think," she said. "Take whatever time you need." She did not take very long. 3 weeks later, they were together in a way that was not announced, not displayed, not performed for anyone. It existed in private, his penthouse, her apartment. Dinners and restaurants where neither of them was likely to be recognized by someone who would care. It was quiet and specific and unlike anything Amara had experienced before. Minjae was not an easy person to know. He was guarded in ways that went deeper than professional training. There were whole rooms inside him with the doors shut, and he did not open them in any particular order or on any predictable schedule. Sometimes she would ask something simple, and he would go quiet for so long that she thought he had decided not to answer, and then, 20 minutes later, in the middle of something unrelated, he would give her the answer, fully, honestly. Like it had taken him that long to trust that she actually wanted to know. She respected that. She understood it, in a way. She had her own locked doors, but there were things she did not notice at first. Things she explained away. The way he asked her to text him when she arrived places. She told herself it was thoughtfulness. The way he occasionally mentioned, too casually, that certain colleagues of hers had been seen somewhere unexpected. She told herself he was just observant. The way he went quiet and distant when she talked about plans that did not involve him. A trip back to Atlanta for a month. A project with a different client, an old friend from New York who wanted to come visit. She noticed those reactions. She cataloged them. She did not yet connect them into a pattern. The pregnancy was not something either of them had planned, or so she believed. She was careful. She had always been careful. When she started experiencing symptoms in early October, she dismissed them for almost 2 weeks before she finally stood in the bathroom of her apartment with a test in her hands and accepted what the results were telling her. She sat on the edge of the bathtub for a long time. Then she picked up her phone and called Minjae. He answered on the second ring. "What's wrong?" She hadn't said anything yet. She hadn't said a word. "Amara." His voice shifted, tightened. "What happened?" "Nothing's wrong," she said. Her voice came out steadier than she felt. "I need to come see you, tonight. I'll send a car. I'll take a cab." Brief pause. "Okay." She changed her clothes. She put on a jacket that was too heavy for the weather because her hands were cold. She took the cab across the city and rode the private elevator up to his penthouse with the pregnancy test in her jacket pocket, pressed against the inside of her palm through the fabric like a small burning thing. She had prepared for a range of responses. Shock. Silence. The careful, controlled reaction of a man processing unexpected information. Maybe even something warmer because there had been moments between them, small ones, when she had seen in him a longing for something ordinary, for a life that was not defined entirely by power and danger. She had prepared for all of that. She had not prepared for what actually happened. Minjae was at his desk when she walked in. He stood when she entered, which he always did, a formality that had always felt to her like genuine respect rather than performance. He looked at her face and she could see him reading it, the way he always read everything, efficiently and accurately. She reached into her pocket. She set the test on his desk. He looked at it. The silence lasted 4 seconds. She counted. And then, without picking it up, without any of the reactions she had braced for, he said, "I already knew." The floor did not drop out from under her. It just went very still, like the world had paused to let her understand what she was hearing. "What do you mean you already knew?" she said. Her voice was quiet, careful in the way of someone handling something that might explode. He met her eyes. Direct. The way he was direct about everything, even the terrible things. "I mean that I knew before you did." "How is that possible?" The silence before his answer lasted long enough that part of her already knew what was coming. The part that had cataloged the patterns. The part that had noticed the locked doors. The part that had been quietly, subconsciously connecting things for months and then disconnecting them because the conclusion was unacceptable. "I changed your prescription," he said. The words went in cleanly. No hesitation, no softening. She had been on a birth control prescription since before she came to Seoul. There was a pharmacy near her apartment. She had refilled it 4 times. "You—" She stopped. Her mouth was open. She closed it. "You what?" "6 months ago." His voice did not waver. "I knew you were going to leave. You had started talking about going back to the States. You had a meeting with a firm in New York. I couldn't—" He stopped. A muscle moved in his jaw. "I couldn't let that happen." Amara stood on the other side of his desk. The man she had trusted with more than she had trusted anyone in years sat in his chair and watched her absorb what he had just told her. She looked at the pregnancy test still sitting on his desk. Then she looked at him. "You did this to me," she said. He didn't answer, which was its own answer. The sound that came out of her was not a scream and not a sob. It was something smaller and more terrible than either. It was the sound of something fundamental breaking in a place too deep to see. She picked up the test, put it back in her pocket, and walked out. She made it to the elevator before her legs stopped cooperating. Not dramatically, not a collapse, just a sudden refusal, like her body had been running on something that had now run out, and she had to put one hand flat against the cold metal wall of the elevator and breathe through her nose until the floor stopped shifting. The doors closed. She watched her own reflection in the polished steel, jacket too heavy for the weather, face a mask of something that hadn't decided yet whether it was grief or fury or both at the same time. The elevator descended 42 floors in silence. She counted them. It was something to do instead of thinking. Outside, the Seoul night was cold and indifferent and busy with people who had no idea what had just happened on the 42nd floor of a glass tower. And Amara walked to the curb and stood there for a long moment before she realized she had been about to call for a cab using the app Min-jae had set up on her phone. The app connected to an account he paid for. She had never thought about that before. She had never thought about how many things in her daily life had quietly become connected to him. She opened a different app, paid for it herself, waited 8 minutes in the cold. On the ride back to her apartment, she did not cry. She sat with her hands in her lap and the pregnancy test in her jacket pocket, and she thought about 6 months ago. She counted backwards. She retraced every prescription refill, every pharmacy visit, the morning she had been careful and responsible the way she had always been, the absolute certainty she had maintained that she was protected. She thought about who had access to her apartment. She thought about how he always knew things slightly before she told him. She thought about the night, 4 months ago, when she had come home to find her kitchen organized differently and assumed she had done it herself and forgotten, because she was tired, because she was always tired. By the time the cab pulled up to her building, the fury had separated itself from the grief and risen to the top like oil on water, clean, distinct, burning. She did not sleep that night. She sat at her kitchen table with her laptop and her phone, and she pulled up every document she had signed when she took the consulting contract. Every clause, every provision that connected her legally or financially to any entity associated with Kong Holdings. She had a friend in New York, Dana, who had gone to law school and then pivoted into entertainment but still knew enough to be useful. She texted her at 2 in the morning Seoul time, which was 10 in the morning in New York, and typed, "I need to talk. It's important, and I need you not to panic when I explain." Dana called back in 4 minutes. Amara explained. There was a silence on the other end that lasted long enough that she said, "Dana, I'm here." Dana's voice was flat with the specific flatness of someone pressing down hard on their first reaction. "Say that again, the part about the prescription." Amara said it again. "Amara." Another pause. "That's what he did is, I know what it is. That's not a gray area. That's not complicated. I know." Her voice came out sharp, not at Dana, just at the word she did not want said out loud yet, because saying it out loud made it a different kind of real. "I need to know what my options are, contract-wise, visa-wise. If I need to leave the country fast." "You want to leave?" "I want to know if I can." Dana shifted into practical mode, which was one of the things Amara had always loved about her. The ability to feel the full weight of something terrible and still function inside it. They talked for 90 minutes. By the end of it, Amara had 3 names: an immigration attorney in Seoul, a contract specialist who dealt with foreign nationals, and a contact at the American consulate that Dana's former colleague had used 2 years ago. She wrote down all 3 numbers. Then she sat in the silence of her kitchen with the early light starting to come through the window and thought about the life that was currently happening inside her body without her permission, the result of a decision that had never been hers to make. Her phone had been buzzing since she left the penthouse. She turned it face down on the table and left it there. Min-jae did not call only once. He called 11 times before 7 in the morning. She did not answer any of them. At 7:15, her phone buzzed with a text. She turned it over and read it because she needed to know what register he was operating in, whether it was going to be apology or justification or something that looked like concern but was actually pressure. The text said, "I'm not going to explain what I did. I know there's no explanation that's acceptable, but I need to know you're safe." She read it twice. Then she set the phone back down, face first. He was right that there was no acceptable explanation. She was not going to give him credit for knowing that. Knowing you've done something indefensible is not a virtue. It does not earn you anything. She showered. She ate half a piece of toast because her stomach was unreliable, and she knew, even in the middle of everything, that she had to be practical about the physical reality of what her body was doing. She called the immigration attorney at 9 a.m. and had an appointment scheduled for the following morning. Then she went to work because her deadlines did not care what had happened last night, and because the one thing she had always been able to count on was that work would accept her exactly as she was, no questions asked. The office was on the 14th floor of a different building, the consulting firm's own space, not Kang Holdings. She had always kept that separation deliberate, even after she and Min Jae became involved. Her colleagues there did not know about the relationship. Some suspected something. She could tell from the way conversations paused when she entered rooms, but nobody had pushed. She sat at her desk and opened her laptop and started working on a brand audit that was due Friday. She made it about 40 minutes before her desk phone rang with an internal transfer, which almost never happened. She picked it up. "Miss Whitfield." The voice was one she recognized. Hyun Soo, Min Jae's chief of staff. Precise, always slightly over-formal, conveying messages with exactly the words required and no extras. "Mr. Kang would like to meet with you today, at your convenience. He wanted me to emphasize that phrase, your convenience." She was quiet for a moment. "Tell Mr. Kang that my convenience is next week," she said. A brief pause. "I'll pass that along." She hung up. 14 minutes later, the desk phone rang again. "He asks if you're willing to speak by phone in the interim." "No." "I'll pass that along." She went back to the brand audit. She got another 45 minutes in before she became aware of someone standing in the corridor outside the glass partition of her workspace. She looked up. It was not Min Jae. It was Park Ji-hoon, his head of security, a quiet man in his mid-40s who Amara had met 3 times, and who had always struck her as someone who had made peace with all of his choices a long time ago. He stood in the corridor with his hands at his sides and made a small gesture that was not threatening and not demanding. It was closer to a request. She closed her laptop. She walked out to the corridor. She kept her voice low. "He sent you here. He asked me to check that you were all right." "I'm at work. I'm clearly all right." Ji-hoon looked at her in the steady, unhurried way he had. "He's not doing well, Ms. Whitfield. I'm not interested in that right now." "I know." He nodded once. "I just wanted to say it. Whatever else is true, the man I've known for 15 years is not doing well this morning." She looked at Ji-hoon for a long moment. She thought about asking him what he knew, whether he had known, whether everyone around Min Jae had watched this happen and said nothing. But the answer to that would only add more weight, and she was already carrying enough that it was hard to breathe in a straight line. "Thank you for coming," she said. "Please tell him I'm at work and I'll be in contact when I'm ready." Ji-hoon nodded again. He left. She went back to her desk and sat down and stared at the brand audit for 3 full minutes without reading a word of it. Then she picked up her cell phone and texted Min Jae directly for the first time since she'd walked out. The text said, "Do not send people to my workplace again." His response came back in under 30 seconds. "Understood. I'm sorry." She put the phone away. That night, alone in her apartment, the physical reality of the pregnancy stopped being abstract. She was nauseous in a way that was no longer ignorable. She lay on her bathroom floor for 20 minutes because the tiles were cold and the cold helped. She thought about the fact that she had been brought to this floor, in this bathroom, in this city, by a chain of decisions that had included exactly 0 that were hers. That was the thing that kept landing hardest. Not the relationship, not even the betrayal in the abstract, but the specific surgical removal of her ability to choose. He had looked at the future he wanted, and he had simply engineered it, without her knowledge, without her consent. With the same competence and thoroughness he brought to every other problem he decided to solve. She had been a problem he decided to solve. The fury came back with that thought, clean and cold and very, very clear. She had the meeting with the immigration attorney the next morning. The attorney, a small, precise woman named Cho Eunji, who wore reading glasses on a chain and had the manner of someone who had seen everything twice, walked her through her options with professional detachment that Amara found enormously comforting. Her visa situation was manageable. Her contract had a termination clause that was operable with 30 days' notice. There were no provisions that legally bound her to Seoul or to any entity connected to Kong Holdings in a way that would complicate departure. "Are you planning to leave Korea?" Yoonji asked. "I'm planning to have options," Amara said. Yoonji nodded. "Then you have them." She left the attorney's office and stood on the street in the thin morning sunlight and let herself feel, for just a moment, the specific relief of knowing that no one had managed to take that from her. She could leave. The door existed. She had not yet decided whether to walk through it. On the fourth day after leaving his penthouse, Min Jae appeared at her apartment building. She was coming back from a walk, the kind she had started taking in the mornings because the nausea was better if she moved. And she turned the corner to her block, and he was simply there, standing on the pavement outside her building in a charcoal coat, not pacing, not on his phone, just standing, like he had calculated that this was where she would eventually be, and then waited. She stopped walking when she saw him. He saw her stop. He did not move toward her. He stood where he was and let her decide. She walked forward. She stopped 6 feet away from him, which was close enough to talk and far enough to make a point. "You have 1 minute," she said. He looked at her. His face had something in it she had almost never seen there, not remorse as performance, something rawer than that, something that looked like a man who had been alone with himself for 4 days and had not enjoyed the company. "I don't need a minute," he said. "I need you to know that I understand what I did, not why I did it. I know why I did it, and the reason doesn't make it acceptable. I understand what it was, what it took from you. You don't get to name what it took from me." "No," he agreed. "I don't." She watched him for a moment. Her hands were in her coat pockets. Her jaw was tight. "I have a question," she said. He waited. "The pharmacy. How?" He was quiet for 1 beat. Then he said, "I had someone replace the active prescription with an inactive compound. It looked identical. You had no way to know." The detail of it, the pharmacist, the identical packaging, the months of careful deception, hit her differently than the abstract knowledge had. She had been taking a pill every morning in the certainty that it was doing what it was supposed to do, and the entire time, someone had gone to the trouble of making sure it wasn't. The clinical precision of it was somehow worse than impulsiveness would have been. "Who else knew?" she said. "One person. The person who arranged it. No one on my staff. Not Ji-hoon. I'm supposed to find comfort in that." "No. I'm just answering the question." She looked at him on the pavement outside her building. The Seoul morning moved around them. A delivery truck idling, 2 women with strollers, a man on a bicycle. The ordinary world going about its ordinary business. "I'm going to need you to step back from everything," she said. "The consulting contract, whatever informal arrangement we had, all of it. I'm going to need distance, and I'm going to need you to respect it without sending Ji-hoon or anyone else to check on me or report to you." "Okay. I'm serious, Min Jae." "I know you are." He held her gaze. "I'll step back. I won't contact you unless you contact me first." She nodded once. She walked past him into her building. She did not look back, and she did not let herself exhale until the lobby doors were closed behind her. The next 3 weeks were the hardest she had experienced since arriving in Seoul. She went to work. She attended her medical appointments alone, navigating Korean language paperwork with her phone translator and the patience of someone who had no other option. She called her mother once and got as far as "I've had a complicated few weeks" before her mother, who had the instincts of a woman who had raised 3 children alone for 2 years while her husband was on the road, said, "What kind of complicated?" Amara said, "The kind I need to work out myself first." Her mother was quiet for a moment. Then, "You know where I am." "I know." "You eating?" "Yes." "You sleeping?" "Some." "All right." Her mother's voice was careful, held back. "When you're ready." After she hung up, Amara sat on her couch and thought about what ready meant. She was not ready to tell her mother she was pregnant. She was not ready to explain the circumstances. She was not ready to have the conversation that would inevitably involve her mother saying things that were entirely justified and that Amara did not yet have the capacity to sit inside. But she was also becoming aware that she needed to make a decision about her future. Not Minjai's future. Not a future that was organized around what had happened between them. Her own future, as a 30-year-old woman who was currently 2.5 months pregnant and had roughly 12 more weeks before her consulting contract expired, and she had to decide whether to renew it. She started writing, not journaling. She had always found journaling self-indulgent in a way she couldn't get past, but practical lists. What she had, what she needed, what she could build on her own. She had a reputation and brand strategy that was entirely hers. The work she had done in Seoul had been good, and some of it had been visible enough that 2 of the clients she'd worked with had reached out to ask if she did independent consulting. She had always said she was contracted. She had never said she wasn't interested. She pulled up those email threads. She started replying. It was during this period that Min-jae made his one mistake since agreeing to step back. He did not contact her. He did not send anyone to her building. He did not interfere with her work. But 3 weeks after their conversation outside her apartment, she was at lunch with a colleague, a Korean woman named Song Yeon, who was one of the few people at the firm Amara genuinely liked. And Yeon said, mid-sentence, "Oh, I meant to ask, did Kang Holdings resolve that licensing issue? I heard it got complicated." Amara set her chopsticks down. "What licensing issue?" Yeon looked faintly surprised. "The American market expansion. I heard they ran into some regulatory complications and had to push the timeline back." She shrugged. "I assumed you knew, since you handled a lot of the brand work for that division." Amara had handled the brand work for that division. She had delivered the full campaign strategy 4 months ago, before everything fell apart. She had not heard anything about regulatory complications. She asked Yeon carefully, as casually as she could manage, where she'd heard this. One of the associates mentioned it. I think he was in a meeting with their external legal team. Amara went back to her food. She kept her face neutral. She finished lunch and went back to her desk and spent 45 minutes pulling records, cross-referencing the brand launch timeline with the regulatory filing schedule she had been CC'd on as part of the project. The complications were real, but the timeline didn't match what it should have been. There had been a filing that should have gone through in October that appeared to have been delayed. The delay had been initiated by an internal memo that Amara had not been party to. She could not be certain. She was reading documents that were only partially visible to her. But the shape of it, the timing, the specific delay, the fact that it centered on the one division she had been most involved with, pulled at something in her that she could not ignore. She called Dana in New York that evening. "I think he's trying to keep me professionally entangled," she said, "not by controlling me directly, by making the work complicated enough that I have a reason to stay involved." Dana was quiet for a moment. "Can you prove it?" "No." "Is it possible it's just a coincidence?" "Maybe." She pressed her fingers against the bridge of her nose. "But I've been watching this man operate for over a year. He doesn't have coincidences. He has strategies." "Amara." Dana's voice was careful. "What do you want to do?" She had already made the decision before she called. She knew that. She had just needed to say it out loud to someone before she acted on it. "I'm going to resign," she said, "and then I'm going to go home." The resignation letter took her 40 minutes to write. Not because she didn't know what to say, but because she kept stopping and sitting with the weight of what she was actually doing. Leaving Seoul meant leaving a career trajectory that had been, up until 4 days after that evening in the penthouse, the best professional chapter of her life. It meant leaving the city she had come to love in ways she had not expected. It meant going home to Atlanta and explaining things she was not ready to explain, and starting over in a way that felt, from the inside, like failure, even though she knew from the outside it was the opposite. She sent the letter at 11:15 on a Thursday night. At 11:40, she received a reply from the firm's director acknowledging receipt. At midnight, her phone buzzed with a text from a number she recognized immediately. Not Mjay's personal number. His secondary line, the one he used for operational communications, which meant he had been watching for professional signals from her account in a way she had told him directly she would not tolerate. The text said, "I know what you're planning. Please don't make this decision tonight." Amara stared at the text for a long moment. Then she picked up her phone and dialed his number. Not the secondary line, his direct line. He answered before the second ring. "You're monitoring my professional communications," she said. Her voice was completely flat. A pause. "I received an alert that you set up." He did not answer that. "Minjae." She said his name the way you say something you are putting down for the last time. "I told you to step back. I told you what I needed. You agreed." "I was worried. You were controlling," she said. "There is a difference and you know it. You have always known it. That is exactly the problem." The silence on his end was different this time, heavier. "I'm leaving," she said. "I'm going back to the States. I want you to understand that this is my decision, made fully by me, and I need you to respect it without any further interference. No alerts, no Ji-hoon, no licensing delays, no strategic complications in any professional arena I am associated with. Nothing." "Amara—" "Nothing, Minjae." The silence stretched. "Okay," he said finally. His voice had dropped to something she had never quite heard from him before, something that did not have a strategy inside it. "I'm going to have this baby," she said. "That decision is also mine. I am not asking for your input or your resources or your presence. I am telling you because you have the right to know, and because I am not the kind of person who disappears without telling the truth. But what happens next is my life. Do you understand me?" Another silence. "Yes," he said. "Good." She ended the call. She sat in the silence of her apartment, and the city moved outside her window the way it always did, indifferent and enormous. And she felt something settle in her chest that was not peace exactly, but was the closest thing to it she had felt in weeks. The clarity of a decision made from the inside out, from her own center, without anyone else's architecture holding it up. She booked her flight the next morning. One way. Los Angeles, with a connection through Tokyo, departing in 11 days. She had chosen Los Angeles instead of Atlanta because Los Angeles was where one of the clients she'd emailed had already responded with interest, and because it was far enough from everyone who knew her that she could rebuild without an audience. She started packing that afternoon, methodically, without sentiment. She was on her knees in the bedroom pulling winter clothes from the back of the closet when she found, tucked behind a row of hanging garments on a hook she had never used, a small wireless device she did not recognize. Black. Rectangular. Smaller than a thumb drive. She sat back on her heels. She held it in her palm. She looked at it for a long time. Then she stood up, walked to her bathroom, dropped it into the toilet, and flushed it. She returned to her packing and did not stop until the suitcases were full. She left Seoul on a Tuesday morning, in rain. Not the dramatic kind of rain that arrives like punctuation. Just the ordinary, persistent Seoul drizzle that made the airport windows run with gray streaks and turned the tarmac into a mirror reflecting nothing interesting. Amara pulled her carry-on through departures with the specific focus of someone who had already done all the feeling available to her in the last 11 days and was now operating on the other side of it. Not numb exactly, but conserved. Like a phone at 12% battery that has turned off everything except the essential functions. She did not look back at the city through the terminal windows. She had said her goodbyes to Seoul privately in the early mornings of her last week there, walking the streets near her apartment before the city woke up fully. She had let herself grieve that part. The city itself, the life she had been building, the version of herself that had existed here before everything changed. She had given that grief its time, and then she had packed it away with the same methodical energy she'd used on her suitcases. What she did not allow herself to grieve, not yet, was Minjae. There was no version of that grief she could safely open in the next several months. It required more stability than she currently had. She filed it away in the same mental place she kept other things too large to process in real time, and she boarded the flight to Tokyo and then the connection to Los Angeles, and she slept for 4 hours somewhere over the Pacific and woke up with her neck stiff and her mouth dry, and the very specific loneliness of someone who has made a correct decision that costs them everything anyway. Los Angeles received her the way it receives everyone, with traffic and sunshine and complete indifference to her particular situation. She had rented a furnished apartment in Culver City through an online platform, a one-bedroom on the second floor of a building that smelled faintly of someone else's cooking and had a window that looked out on a parking structure. It was deeply unremarkable. She loved it immediately, the way you love anything that makes no demands on you. The client who had responded to her email, a mid-sized lifestyle brand called Vero that was trying to reposition for a slightly older demographic, offered her a short-term consulting contract within 48 hours of her landing. The creative director, a woman named Patricia Osei, who conducted their first call wearing reading glasses pushed up on her forehead and speaking with the efficiency of someone who had no patience for preliminary small talk, said, "I looked at the Kong Holdings hotel rebrand. The logic of it is very clean. Are you available to start next week?" "I can start Thursday," Amara said. "Thursday works." That was that. She built her days around work and medical appointments and the slow, unglamorous labor of setting up a life in a new city while pregnant. She found an OB/GYN at a practice in Culver City, whose front desk coordinator spoke 3 languages, and whose waiting room had comfortable chairs. She found a grocery store she liked. She found a Thai place 2 blocks from her apartment that was open until midnight, which mattered more than she had anticipated given the hours her appetite kept. She called her mother on a Sunday, 3 weeks after arriving. She told her everything. The silence on her mother's end lasted almost a full minute, which for her mother was geological in scale. "You're in Los Angeles," her mother said finally. "Yes." "And you're—" A pause. "How far along?" "Almost 14 weeks. Another silence. Then, "Are you safe?" "Yes." "Is he going to come after you?" "No." She believed that when she said it. She had no specific reason not to. "He said he'd respect my decision." Her mother made a sound that was not quite a word. Then she said, "I'm coming out there." "Mama, you don't have to." "Amara." Her mother's voice was the specific temperature of a woman who has made up her mind and is informing you as a courtesy, not asking permission. "I'm coming out there." Her mother arrived 10 days later with 2 checked bags and a cooler packed with food from Atlanta, frozen portions of the things Amara had grown up eating, labeled in her mother's handwriting and packed with the thoroughness of someone who did not trust Los Angeles to have the right ingredients. She walked into the Culver City apartment, looked around it with the expression of a woman cataloging everything that needed fixing, and then looked at her daughter. "You look tired," she said. "I'm pregnant." "You look more tired than pregnant." Amara did not argue with that. Her mother stayed 2 weeks. She did not push Amara to talk about Minjae beyond what Amara had already told her. She did not offer opinions about decisions already made. She cooked. She reorganized the kitchen in a way that actually made more sense. She came to 1 prenatal appointment and sat in the waiting room reading a magazine because Amara said she was fine to go in alone, and her mother did not argue. On the last night before she flew back to Atlanta, they sat together on the small couch in Amara's apartment, her mother's flight leaving early enough that this was the last real evening, and her mother said, "What are you going to do about him?" "I'm going to raise this baby," Amara said, "and build my company. And he can be whatever he's going to be in the background. He's going to want to be involved. That's his problem to figure out." Her mother looked at her for a moment. "You loved him." It was not a question. "Yes," Amara said, simply, without flinching from it. "That doesn't go away fast." "No," she agreed. "It doesn't." Her mother nodded. She did not say anything else about it. She understood, the way women who have survived their own versions of this tend to understand, that some things are not problems to be solved, but territories to be crossed, and the crossing takes the time it takes. Amara got up and went to refill their water glasses, and that was the end of that conversation. What happened 3 weeks after her mother left was the thing Amara had not prepared for. She had been doing well. Not perfectly. There were mornings she woke up at 3 a.m. and lay in the dark with the full weight of everything pressing down and had to breathe through it with the discipline of someone who has trained themselves not to drown. There were moments in the middle of otherwise ordinary days when a specific memory would surface without warning. The sound of his voice saying her name, the particular way he looked at her when he thought she wasn't watching, the night she had woken up at 2 in the morning in his apartment and found him already awake, sitting at the kitchen table with a glass of water. And he had looked at her without saying anything, and she had sat down across from him, and they had just existed in that silence together for 20 minutes, like it was the most natural thing in the world. Those memories were the expensive kind. They cost her more than anger did. Anger was useful. Those memories were just loss. But she was moving. She was building. The Vero contract had expanded. Patricia had referred her to 2 other brands in her network, and Amara had begun to see the outline of something real taking shape. Not just freelancing, a proper agency. Small at first, just her, maybe 1 contractor, but with the kind of structural foundation that could grow. She was sketching out the business plan on a Thursday evening, sitting at the small desk she had positioned under the window when her phone rang with a number she did not recognize. Area code she didn't place immediately. She almost let it go to voicemail. Then something made her pick up. Ms. Whitfield. The voice was male, Korean accented English, professional in a way that was slightly too rehearsed. My name is Lee Sang-won. I'm an attorney based in Seoul. I represent a group of parties with an interest in matters connected to Kong Holdings. She went very still. I apologize for the direct contact. I obtained your number through professional channels. A pause. I believe you may not be aware of certain legal proceedings currently underway in Seoul that involve activities from the period of your professional engagement with entities associated with Kong Min-jae. She picked up a pen. She did not write anything with it. She just held it. What kind of proceedings? She said. A multi-agency financial investigation, Lee said carefully, involving allegations of money movement through the hospitality division of Kong Holdings. The specific campaigns in question were executed during the 14 months you served as the primary brand strategist for that division. The room got very quiet. The investigation is not targeting you personally at this stage, he continued. However, your professional work product has been subpoenaed as part of the evidentiary record. Your name appears in a significant number of internal documents associated with the transactions under review. She set the pen down. Why are you calling me? She said. You said you represent parties with an interest. Which parties? A brief pause. I represent certain individuals who wish to ensure that the investigation proceeds without interference. Some of those individuals believe that Mr. Kang may attempt to use his relationship with you as leverage, either to obtain your cooperation in shaping a narrative or to place you in a position of legal exposure as a tactical consideration. She stood up from the desk. She walked to the window. Below, the parking structure was full and lit and empty of people. You're telling me he might try to implicate me. I am telling you that you should be aware of the possibility, Lee said, and that you should, at your earliest opportunity, retain independent legal counsel familiar with international financial law. Who are you working for? She said again. Specifically. Another pause, longer this time. People who are not your enemies, Ms. Whitfield. That's not an answer. It's the answer I'm able to give. She ended the call. She stood at the window for a long time. The parking structure below went on being exactly what it was. Then she called Dana. Dana listened without interrupting, which meant she was alarmed. Dana's baseline was interruption. Silence from Dana meant processing something serious. Okay, Dana said when Amara finished. First, that call could be legitimate, or it could be a pressure tactic designed to unsettle you. We don't know which yet. I know. Second, if your work product is actually subpoenaed in a Korean financial investigation, that is a real thing with real implications for you professionally and possibly legally, regardless of who that attorney represents. I know that too. Third, Dana said, and her voice changed register slightly. How much did you know about the actual structure of Kang Holdings businesses during the time you were working with them? The question landed with precision. Amara had been waiting for it. Not from Dana specifically, but from somewhere. From some version of a person she trusted enough to be honest with. I knew it was complicated, she said. I knew there were things I wasn't seeing. I was doing brand work, campaign strategy, positioning, narrative development. I wasn't in financial meetings. I wasn't part of any operational discussions beyond my scope. But you knew the company wasn't entirely clean. She looked at her reflection faint in the dark window glass. Yes, she said. I knew it wasn't entirely clean, and you stayed. I stayed. No defensiveness in it, just the fact. Dana breathed out slowly. All right, that's not a crime. Knowing a client has complicated business practices and doing brand work for their legitimate hospitality division is not criminal exposure. But it means that if someone wants to build a narrative that implicates you, they have material to work with. Because I stayed. Because you stayed. Amara pressed her palm flat against the cool glass of the window. I need a lawyer, she said. I have 2 names. International financial experience, both currently licensed in California. I'll text them to you tonight. Thank you. Amara. Dana's voice dropped to something quieter. Is there any chance he's behind that call? Min-jae, is there any chance this is him trying to pull you back in? She had thought about that during the 8 minutes between ending Lee's call and dialing Dana's number. She had turned it over carefully, the way you examine something you suspect is broken before you apply pressure to it. I don't know, she said. It's not his style. His style is direct. He doesn't use third parties to manipulate situations like this. She stopped. Or at least I didn't think he did. He replaced your birth control, Dana said. Not cruelly, just as a data point. I know. You might not know his style as well as you think. I know that too, Amara said quietly. She contacted the first attorney Dana texted her the following morning. His name was Raymond Castillo, and he had an office in Century City and 17 years of experience in cross-border financial litigation. He had the manner of someone who was constitutionally incapable of being surprised, which Amara found immediately reassuring. She walked him through everything: the consulting work, the duration of her engagement with Kong Holdings, the nature of her professional relationship with Min-jae, the pregnancy, the move to Los Angeles, and the call from Lee Sang-won. Castillo took notes throughout. He did not react to any particular part of it with anything beyond focused attention. When she finished, he asked several very specific questions about the brand campaign she had worked on. Which divisions, which deliverables, whether she had been included in any financial review meetings, whether she had signed any documents beyond standard consulting agreements. She answered each one accurately. Then he said, "The call from Lee Sang-won is interesting. The specific framing, warning you that Kong might try to use you as leverage, is the kind of language designed to create fear and urgency. Whether that's because it's true or because someone wants you frightened and off balance, I can't tell you yet." How do you find out? I make some inquiries in Seoul. I have contacts there. And I review whatever they send you, if anything comes. He looked at her steadily. In the meantime, you don't contact Min-jae Kong. You don't communicate with anyone associated with Kong Holdings. If anyone contacts you, attorneys, investigators, anyone, you refer them directly to me. Okay. And, he said, if Min-jae Kong contacts you directly, you tell me immediately. She nodded. She left his office and stood on the Century City pavement in the Los Angeles afternoon, the sun doing what it always did out here, pressing down warm and absolute. And she thought about how far she was from the version of her life that had existed 14 months ago. Min-jae's call came 4 days later. She almost didn't answer. She had her hand on the decline button. Then she thought about Castillo's instruction. If he contacts you, tell me immediately. And she picked up instead because she needed to know what he knew before she reported it. I need you to hear something from me directly, Min-jae said. His voice was different. Not the controlled, measured voice she knew. Tighter. Like something was pressing on it from the inside. There is an investigation. It's been building for several months. I don't believe you are in any legal danger, but I cannot control what the investigators choose to look at, and your name is in documents. I know, she said. I was contacted by someone named Lee Sang-won. A silence, sharp and immediate. When? He said. 4 days ago. Amara. His voice changed again. Something urgent in it now. Not the urgency of control, but the urgency of someone who has just understood something that frightens them. Lee Sang-won does not represent parties who are neutral in this. He works for people who are trying to dismantle my organization. Not through the investigation, alongside it. He would have no interest in protecting you. He would have every interest in making you afraid enough to cooperate with them. Cooperate with them how? Testimony, documents, whatever your professional work product can be shaped into when it's handled by people who know how to shape things. She stood in her apartment with the phone against her ear. So you're telling me, she said slowly, that the people who called to warn me about you are actually dangerous, and I should trust your version of this instead. The silence that followed was the specific silence of a man who has heard exactly what his situation sounds like from the outside. I understand how that sounds, he said. Do you? Yes. A beat. I know I have no standing to ask you to trust me. I know that, but I need you to be careful, regardless of anything else between us. Lee Sang-won's clients are not people who will stop at your professional reputation. She sat down on the edge of her couch. What does that mean? She said. Her voice had gone careful and quiet. It means... He stopped. She could hear him choosing words. There are people who have wanted to move against my organization for a long time who have not been able to do so directly. Using you, your name, your pregnancy, the narrative of a woman who was deceived and has relevant professional knowledge gives them something they can leverage publicly and legally. They will use it whether you cooperate with them or not. The question is how much exposure you end up with in the process. She put her elbow on her knee and her forehead in her hand. So I'm a pawn, she said, in whatever is happening between you and people I've never met, because I spent 14 months doing honest work for your company. He did not answer that immediately. I put you in this position, he said. I know that. Minjae. She lifted her head. Her voice came out steadier than she felt. I have retained my own attorney. I am handling this situation. What I need from you right now is every document you have that establishes clearly what my professional scope was and was not during my time with your company. Every scope of work agreement, every project brief, everything that shows I was doing brand strategy and nothing else. Can you get me that? Within 24 hours. Send it to my attorney. I'll text you his contact information. A pause. Okay. And Minjae. She stood up. After you send those documents, I need you to understand something. I am 5 months pregnant. I am building a business in a city where I know almost no one. I am now apparently a peripheral figure in a criminal investigation through no action of my own, which is a situation I am in specifically because of decisions you made. And I am handling all of that, myself, without asking you for anything beyond what I just asked for. She could hear him breathing. I know, he said. His voice had stripped down to something she had almost never heard from him, something without a strategy in it. Then let me handle it, she said. She ended the call. She sat back down on the couch. The apartment was quiet around her, late afternoon light coming through the window, the muffled sound of someone else's television through the wall. She was 5 months pregnant and implicated, however peripherally, in an investigation she had not known existed, and the man responsible for her being in Seoul in the first place. The man responsible for the pregnancy. The man she had trusted more completely than she had trusted anyone in years. That man was now her primary source of information about a threat she could not fully evaluate because she didn't know whether to believe him. She looked at her hands. They were steady. She was not sure what that said about her, or what it cost, but they were steady. Her phone buzzed with a text. It was from a number she did not recognize, different from Lee Sang-won's. The text contained no introduction, no greeting, just a link, and below the link, 6 words. You should know who he is. She stared at the text. She did not click the link. She took a screenshot and texted it to Castillo immediately. His response came back in 11 minutes. Don't click it. I'll have it analyzed. Don't respond to the number. She put her phone face down on the coffee table. She sat in the silence of her apartment, and she thought about the device she had found in her closet in Seoul and flushed. And she thought about Lee Sang-won's phone call, and she thought about the text with the link, and she thought about Minjae's voice when he said the name Lee Sang-won, the way it had gone sharp and immediate, the way a person's voice goes when they recognize a specific danger they have been aware of for a long time. She thought about the baby, who was currently making herself known with a series of small, insistent movements that had started in the last 2 weeks. Strange and intimate and entirely indifferent to the situation occurring outside of that. She pressed her hand flat against her stomach. The movements continued, small and steady. She had built this life out of nothing in 4 months. She had survived losing Minjae, leaving Seoul, telling her mother, starting over, building a client base, retaining a lawyer, and now this. She was still here, still functional, still moving. But she was also, she understood with cold and complete clarity, not out of danger yet. Because 3 days later, Castillo called her at 7:15 in the morning, which was not his habit, and when she answered, she could tell from his voice before he said a single word that whatever he had found was not good. The documents Minjae sent, he said. I've reviewed them. And? A pause that lasted exactly long enough to be its own kind of answer. There's a problem, Castillo said, with one of the scope of work agreements. She sat up in bed. What kind of problem? The agreement covering the third quarter campaign for the hospitality division's Asian expansion, the one that would most clearly define your work as purely strategic. He stopped. It's been altered. After the fact, the version he sent me has language in it that wasn't in the original filing. She went cold from her chest outward. How do you know what the original filing said? Because the investigation has already subpoenaed the original, Castillo said, and someone, between the time that subpoena was filed and the time those documents were sent to me, changed the language in a way that narrows your professional scope on paper, but also, and this is the part you need to understand very carefully, creates a discrepancy between the version in my hands and the version in the investigator's hands. She was standing now. She did not remember standing up. Which makes it look, Castillo said quietly, like someone on your side of this attempted to alter evidence. The silence between them was not empty. It was full of everything she was understanding in real time, one piece landing after another, each one worse than the one before. He sent me altered documents, she said, or someone within his organization altered them without his knowledge. I can't determine that from here. But the effect is the same. The effect is the same, Castillo confirmed. You now have in your possession a document that contradicts the official evidentiary record, and your fingerprints, professionally speaking, are on the original work. She stood in her bedroom in the early morning light of Los Angeles, 5 months pregnant, and understood that she had just been handed something that could destroy everything she had built, everything she was trying to build, her reputation, her agency, her future, and it had been handed to her by the one person she had just trusted enough to ask for help. Whether that was deliberate or catastrophic negligence, she did not yet know. What she knew was that it did not matter which one it was. She called Min Jae at 7:41 in the morning. He answered on the first ring, which meant he had been awake, which meant he already knew something had gone wrong somewhere in the chain of what he had sent her. The documents, she said. No preamble. The Q3 scope of work agreement. Did you know it was altered before you sent it to me? The pause lasted 3 seconds. 3 seconds was a very long time from a man who normally processed and responded with the speed of someone who had spent decades making fast decisions in high-stakes rooms. Tell me what your attorney found, he said. Answer my question first. Another pause. Shorter. I did not know it had been altered. But you're not surprised. The silence that followed that was its own answer. Min Jae. Her voice came out with a flatness that surprised even her. Not cold, not hot, just stripped of everything except the core of what she needed to know. Who in your organization would have had access to that document and a reason to change it? I need to make some calls. I need an answer. Amara. His voice had something in it she had not heard before, a kind of controlled urgency that was different from his usual authority. This was not a man managing a situation. This was a man who had just realized the situation was larger than he thought. I need you to trust me for 48 hours. The sound she made was not a laugh. It was the sound a laugh makes when all the humor has been removed from it. You understand, she said, what you're asking? Yes. You understand that I am sitting in Los Angeles with a document in my attorney's possession that makes me look complicit in evidence tampering, in an investigation I had nothing to do with, and you are asking me to give you 48 hours. Yes. A beat. I know what I'm asking. She stood at her bedroom window. The parking structure outside was filling up with the early morning arrivals, people walking from their cars to wherever they needed to be, carrying coffee cups and bags and the ordinary equipment of ordinary days. None of them had any idea. You have 24 hours, she said. Not 48, 24. And you report to my attorney directly, not to me. Okay. If I don't hear from Castillo by 7 a.m. tomorrow with something actionable, I go to the investigators myself, voluntarily, with everything I have. I understand. Do not test me on this. I won't. She ended the call. She stood at the window for another minute. Then she went to the kitchen and made herself eat something, because the baby did not care about the investigation or the altered documents or any of the rest of it. And Amara had learned in the past 5 months that the body keeps its own schedule regardless of what the mind is dealing with. She ate half a bowl of oatmeal standing at the counter. She texted Castillo to expect contact from Min Jae's legal team within the day. She showered and dressed and opened her laptop and worked on the Vero deliverable that was due at noon because the work was still there and the deadline was still real, and she had built a reputation on delivering, and she was not about to let any of this take that from her too. She delivered the Vero project at 11:53. Patricia replied at 12:08. Clean. Good instincts on the pivot to the wellness angle. We'll talk Thursday. Amara closed her laptop and sat at her desk and let herself feel, for approximately 90 seconds, the specific satisfaction of work done well. Then she opened it again and started on the next thing. At 4:17 in the afternoon, Castillo called. Minjai's legal team has been in contact, he said. They've identified the source of the alteration. She sat up straight. Who? An internal compliance officer named Baek Hyun-chul. He's been with the organization for 11 years. According to Minjai's attorneys, Baek has been cooperating with Lee Sang-won's clients for approximately 8 months. He had access to the document archive and altered the file 4 days ago, the same day Minjai's team pulled the documents in response to your request. He altered it knowing Minjai would send it to me. That appears to be the intent. Yes. She pressed her fingers against her temple. The goal, Castillo continued carefully, was to create a discrepancy between the document in my possession and the subpoenaed original, which would then be discovered by investigators and attributed to, depending on how the narrative was constructed, either Minjai attempting to protect you or you and Minjai cooperating to shape evidence. Either way, I'm in the middle of it. Either way, you're in the middle of it. She stood up and walked to the window. Same parking structure. Different light now. Late afternoon gold coming off the concrete. Can this be fixed? She said. Minjai's attorneys are preparing a disclosure to the investigative body that identifies Baek as the source of the alteration and provides the authentication trail showing the document was modified after the original filing date. If the authentication holds, and preliminary indicators suggest it will, it clears the discrepancy and actually strengthens the case that someone outside your professional relationship was attempting to manufacture evidence. How long? They're moving fast. Minjai apparently made it very clear that speed was the priority. Castillo paused. He also asked me to tell you something directly. What? He said, tell her I found it. Tell her I'm sorry it got this far before I did. She stood at the window for a moment. Okay, she said. Are you all right? I'll let you know when this is over, she said. Thank you, Raymond. She ended the call. She put her phone in her pocket and stood in the middle of her apartment in the Culver City afternoon and felt the baby move. 3 small, distinct movements in a row, like punctuation. She put her hand on her stomach. I know, she said quietly, to nobody, to both of them. I know. The authentication disclosure went through in 31 hours. Castillo called her at 2 in the afternoon 2 days later with a voice that had added, for the first time since she'd hired him, a note of something that was not quite excitement, but was adjacent to it, the specific satisfaction of a legal professional who has watched a threat dissolve through the application of correct and timely documentation. Baek Hyun-chul had been arrested in Seoul that morning. The discrepancy in the documents had been officially attributed to him. Amara's professional record had been reviewed and confirmed as within scope. Her name remained in the investigative documents. It would, because she had done real work for a real company that was under real scrutiny, but her status had shifted from peripheral figure of interest to non-culpable professional witness. You're not a target, Castillo said. You may be asked to provide a statement at some point regarding the scope of your work, but that is a standard procedural matter, and we will handle it together. She exhaled, a slow, deliberate exhale that she had been storing in her chest for approximately a week. Thank you, she said. Thank the authentication trail, he said, and frankly, the speed with which Minjai's attorneys moved. That was fast work. She noted that, filed it in the place where she kept things that complicated her certainties about who he was and what he was capable of. After she got off the phone with Castillo, she did something she had not expected to do. She called Minjai. He answered on the second ring this time. It cleared, she said. I know. My attorneys told me an hour ago. A pause. How are you? Tired, she said, and I'm going to say something to you and I need you to just hear it and not respond. Okay. I know you moved fast on this. I know you identified the problem and fixed it, and I know that cost you something internally, exposing Baek, dealing with the fallout of having a mole in your organization at this particular moment. I'm aware of all of that. She stopped, breathed. It doesn't fix what happened between us. It doesn't change what you did with the prescription or the surveillance device I found in my closet or the monitoring of my professional communications. Doing one right thing in a crisis does not balance those out. I need you to understand that clearly. A silence. I understand it, he said. Good. She ended the call. She sat with the phone in her lap and she felt the tiredness settle through her like sediment, dropping through water, slow and total and absolute. She was 6 months pregnant and she had just navigated a potential criminal exposure situation with one hand while maintaining a client deadline with the other. And her lower back had been hurting since yesterday morning, and she could not remember the last time she had slept more than 5 hours in a row. She ordered food from the Thai place. She ate it on the couch. She fell asleep before 9 o'clock and slept for 11 hours, which was the longest she had slept since leaving Seoul. The next 6 weeks were the closest thing to ordinary that her life had been in a long time. The investigation in Seoul continued, but it moved in directions that had nothing to do with her. Castillo checked in every 2 weeks with updates that remained consistently non-alarming. The business she was building, she had started calling it Grounded, because she needed a name, and that was the word that kept surfacing when she thought about what she was trying to create. Acquired 3 new clients and a part-time contractor named Jules, who was 24 and frighteningly good at visual strategy, and who had absolutely no patience for anything that was not specific and true. Amara's stomach had reached the stage where it preceded her into rooms, and she had made a kind of peace with the physical reality of pregnancy that she had not expected to reach. There were still hard mornings, there were still nights when she lay awake, and the loneliness of doing this specific thing in this specific way, without a partner pressed down with a weight that was hard to describe to anyone who had not felt it. But there was also something she had not anticipated. A kind of private, fierce pride in the fact that she was here, that she had taken the worst thing that had been done to her and turned it into a life she had chosen. Min-jae respected the boundaries she had set. He did not call unless she called first. He sent one message, 3 weeks after the document situation resolved, that said only, "Jin Woo-han tells me I should be talking to someone. I'm doing that now. I thought you should know, though I understand if it doesn't matter." She read it twice. She did not respond. But she did not delete it. It mattered. She did not say so. But it did. The mutual friend who eventually brought them into the same room was a woman named Grace Yoon, a Korean-American architect who had known Min-jae for 15 years through professional circles, and who had met Amara at a design event in Los Angeles 3 months earlier. Grace occupied the particular position of someone who cared about both of them enough to be honest with each of them, and smart enough not to push. She called Amara on a Wednesday afternoon and said, "I'm going to be in LA next month. I'd like to have dinner. And I want to be transparent with you. Min-jae has asked me to tell you that he would like a meeting, if you're ever open to it. Not a negotiation, not a plea, just a meeting. I told him I'd pass it along once and let you decide." Amara was quiet for a moment. "Is he in LA?" she said. "He will be. He's been traveling here for... He didn't tell me why specifically, but I think you know." She knew. He had been traveling to Los Angeles every 2 weeks for the past month and a half. She knew because Dana had mentioned seeing someone who matched his description at a coffee place near Dana's office, and Dana had texted her about it with a string of question marks. And Amara had said, "Don't worry about it." She had not contacted him to acknowledge that she knew. She was not sure why. Maybe because knowing he was coming and not reaching out was its own kind of answer, and she was not ready to reach any particular answer yet. "I'll think about it," she told Grace. She thought about it for 9 days, then she texted him directly. The message said, "Grace mentioned you were in LA. I'm willing to meet. Dinner, not at either of our places. Somewhere neutral. You pick the restaurant and tell me when." His response came back in 4 minutes. Thursday, 7 p.m. "I'll send you the address." The restaurant he chose was a small, very quiet Korean-American fusion place in Silver Lake that she had never been to. The kind of place where the lighting was warm and the tables were far enough apart that conversations did not overlap. She arrived at 6:57 because she was constitutionally incapable of being late, even when punctuality felt like a concession. He was already there. He stood when she walked in, the way he always did, and for a moment she just stood in the entrance of the restaurant and looked at him across the room. He looked different. Not dramatically different, but there was something around the edges of him that had changed. He held himself differently, less constructed, like a building that had had some of its load-bearing walls removed and had not fallen. She walked to the table. They sat across from each other. "You look well," he said. "I look 7 months pregnant," she said. Something moved across his face. Not quite a smile, something softer. You look well, he said again. The server came. They ordered. They ate. The conversation did not begin in the place she expected it to. It began with her asking about Jin Wuhan, his advisor, because he had mentioned therapy and she was curious whether it was genuine or performative. He told her about the sessions with the specific awkwardness of someone who was not comfortable discussing their internal processes, but was making himself do it anyway. He told her things about his childhood, about his father, about the particular way he had learned early that control was the only reliable form of safety, that had not come up in their year together, even in the most private moments. She listened. She ate her food, and she listened, and she did not fill the silences for him. He told her about the moment, in a session 6 weeks earlier, when his therapist had asked him what he was most afraid of, and he had given the answer he always gave: losing the organization, losing his position. And the therapist had waited, and Min-jae had heard himself and understood that he was still lying, and eventually said, I'm afraid of being left by people because I am not worth staying for. And the therapist had written something down and said nothing, and Min-jae had sat in that chair in that office and felt something crack open that had been sealed since he was 9 years old. Amara set her fork down. He was looking at the table. I violated the most important thing you had, he said. Quiet. Direct. No performance in it. Your ability to choose. I took that from you because I was terrified you would choose to leave, and I dressed that terror up as love because I did not know the difference. And I need you to know that I know the difference now. Not because I'm telling you what you need to hear, because I have been sitting inside that understanding for months, and it is not comfortable, and I am not asking you to fix it. The restaurant moved around them. Soft sounds. Other people's conversations. I know, she said. I'm not asking to come back, he said. I'm not asking you to forgive me tonight. I came here because I needed to say what I just said directly to your face, and because... He stopped. His jaw tightened slightly. Because you are 7 months pregnant with my daughter, and I want to be a father to her if you'll allow that. And I understand that right is not automatic. I understand I have to earn it. She looked at him for a long moment. Tell me what that looks like, she said. Concretely. Not philosophically. What does earning it actually look like? He answered, specifically. He talked about the schedule he had already been building for travel between Seoul and Los Angeles. He talked about the legal agreement his attorneys had drafted, which she had not known about, establishing her as the primary parent with full decision-making authority and establishing his financial responsibility without any conditions attached to it. No strings, no leverage, no mechanism for him to use money as a form of control. He talked about therapy as a long-term commitment, not a temporary fix. She listened to all of it. When he finished, she said, send the legal agreement to Castillo. If he says it's clean, I'll review it. Okay. And Min-jae, she met his eyes. I'm not promising anything beyond this dinner. I'm not telling you we're going to be anything to each other except parents. I'm telling you I heard what you said tonight, and I will think about it, and that is all I can offer you right now. That's more than I deserve, he said. Yes, she agreed. It is. She was not cruel when she said it. She was not trying to punish him. It was simply true, and he received it as the truth, and that was its own kind of progress. She got home at 10:15. She took off her shoes at the door. She made herself a glass of water and stood at the window and looked at the parking structure. She felt something she did not have an immediate word for. Not hope exactly. Not forgiveness. Something smaller and more careful than either. The very early, fragile possibility that there might be a future here that was not defined entirely by damage. She put her hand on her stomach. The baby kicked once, hard, like a punctuation mark. The labor began at 34 weeks. She woke at 2 in the morning with a pain that was different from the practice contractions she'd had. Lower, spreading, serious. She lay in the dark for 8 minutes timing it, because she was thorough even at 2 in the morning in early labor. And when the second one came, she knew. She called her OB's emergency line. She called Dana, who screamed once and then went immediately practical. She called a car service because she was not about to call Min-jae at 2 in the morning in a panic, because this was her labor and she was in charge of how it went. She made it to the hospital on her own. She was in triage for 40 minutes, being assessed, before the situation became clear. The baby was early, and there were signs of distress in the fetal monitoring that the on-call OB explained with the careful precision of someone who needed the patient to understand without panicking. They were moving toward a C-section. It was the right call. It needed to happen soon. Amara lay on the hospital bed and nodded at everything the doctor said. She was calm in a way that was not the absence of fear, but the management of it. Fear present and accounted for, filed and set aside because the situation required function, not feeling. She called Dana and gave her the update. Then she stared at the ceiling of the triage room for approximately 45 seconds, and she called Min Jae. He answered on the first ring. It was 5 in the morning in Seoul. "I'm at Cedars," she said. "The baby is early. They're taking her in about 30 minutes. I'm calling because you have the right to know." A silence. Then his voice, stripped of everything except what was underneath. "Are you okay?" "I'm fine. She needs to come out now. They think she'll be fine, but she's early, so there will be—" "I'm coming. You're in Seoul. I'll get on the first flight." His voice was steady, but underneath the steadiness was something she could hear shaking. "I'll be there. You don't have to wait for me. I know you don't have to do anything, but I'm coming." She lay on the hospital bed with the monitors attached to her and the overhead lights of the triage room pressing down, and she thought about telling him not to come. She thought about maintaining the boundaries she had set. She thought about what she had said at dinner about not promising anything beyond that dinner. "Okay," she said. 2 syllables. All as anything. "Okay," he said back, and she could hear in his voice what those 2 syllables had cost her and what they meant to him. The C-section took 41 minutes. At 4:27 in the morning, Los Angeles time, her daughter was born. She was small, 5 pounds, 1 ounce, and she came into the world with the particular indignation of someone who had not been consulted about the timing, a thin, furious cry that the NICU nurse said was an excellent sign. They let Amara see her for 3 minutes before they took her to the NICU. 3 minutes of a face she had been trying to imagine for 7 months, small and red and furious and real. She lay in the recovery room afterward with the specific exhaustion of a body that has been through something absolute. Every part of her hurt in ways she had no previous reference for. The nurse checked on her at regular intervals. Dana arrived at 5:45 from across the city, having driven the moment Amara texted her it was done, and sat beside the bed and held her hand and did not say much of anything, which was exactly right. At 2:17 in the afternoon, Min Jae walked through the door of her hospital room. He had been on a plane for 11 hours. He was wearing the same clothes he had presumably put on when she called him, dark slacks, a simple shirt, no jacket. And he looked like a man who had spent 11 hours on a plane doing the math on everything he might have lost, and arriving at the other side of that math, unable to breathe. He stopped inside the door. Amara was sitting up in the bed. She was exhausted in a way that was past fatigue, and she was in pain that the medication was managing to a tolerable level, and her daughter was in the NICU 2 floors up doing exactly what the doctors had said she would do, working. She looked at him standing in the doorway. He looked at her. Neither of them said anything for a long moment. Then he walked to the chair beside her bed. He sat down. He looked at his hands for a moment, then back at her. "How is she?" he said. "She's strong," Amara said. "She's going to be fine. They said she can probably come home in 2 weeks. He nodded. Something moved in his face that was not a controlled expression. It was just the face of a man receiving information that mattered more than anything he had ever negotiated for. "And you?" he said. "I'm here," she said. He looked at her. His eyes were red in a way she could not attribute entirely to the long flight. His jaw was tight with the effort of keeping whatever was happening inside him, and failing slightly, and not trying very hard to succeed. "You called me," he said quietly. "You had the right to know." "You could have told me after, once it was done." She looked at him. "I know." He understood what she was saying, that she hadn't called him because she was obligated to. That she had called him at 5 in the morning, Seoul time, and said, "I'm at Cedars," because somewhere under everything, under all the damage and all the anger and all the careful distance she had been maintaining, somewhere under all of that, she had reached for him. He did not press it. He did not name it. He was learning, apparently, not to press things. "Can I—" He stopped. Started again. "Is there anything you need right now?" "I need to see her," Amara said. They said I can go to the NICU in an hour, when they move me to a wheelchair. I'll take you, he said. She looked at him for a moment. Okay, she said. The hour passed in the way that hospital hours pass, slowly, in pieces, punctuated by nurses and medication checks, and the thin institutional sounds of a medical floor doing its work. Dana slipped out at some point, with a look at Amara that contained a full conversation's worth of things she did not say out loud. And then it was just the two of them in the room with the late afternoon light and the beeping of the monitor and the specific airless quiet of people who have said all the hard things and are now just existing in the same space. At some point, Min-jae reached out and put his hand over hers. Not a claim, not a pressure, just a hand placed over her hand, warm and steady, and then staying there. She looked down at it. She did not move her hand away. When the nurse came with the wheelchair an hour later, Min-jae stood and positioned it and moved with the particular careful attention of someone who is trying to be useful without being intrusive, and Amara let him because she was tired and her body hurt, and her daughter was 2 floors up in the NICU, and she did not have the energy to refuse help that was being offered without conditions. He pushed the wheelchair down the corridor toward the elevator. She sat in it with her hands in her lap. The corridor was long and fluorescent lit, and the hospital smelled the way hospitals smell, and none of it was romantic or cinematic or neat. When the elevator doors opened and they were inside, he pressed the button for the 4th floor and stood behind her chair and said nothing. She said nothing. The elevator rose. And 2 floors up, in a small acrylic incubator with monitors attached to her chest and a breathing sensor clipped to her foot, their daughter lay working her lungs, doing the necessary, difficult work of being alive in a world that had not been expecting her quite yet. Small and fierce and entirely, stubbornly present, with no knowledge of the story that had brought her here, and no patience for anything except the next breath and the one after that. Her name was Seo Yeon. Amara had not decided that in advance. She had a list, 3 names she had been considering for months, written in the Notes app on her phone, and revisited periodically the way you revisit a decision you know matters but can't quite finalize. She had not shared the list with anyone, not Dana, not her mother, not Min-jae. The name felt like something that needed to happen in the presence of the actual person, not in the abstract. She saw her daughter for the second time through the acrylic wall of the incubator, lit from above by the NICU's particular light, which was warm and specific in a way that had nothing to do with aesthetics and everything to do with the biology of keeping small things alive. 5 pounds, 1 ounce. Fingers like the most precise small architecture Amara had ever seen. A face that had arrived in the world with an expression of concentrated effort, like someone working through a difficult problem. She looked at her for a long time. Then she said quietly, to no one and to both of them, Seo Yeon. Min-jae, standing behind the wheelchair with his hands on the grips, went very still. She felt it. The stillness. Through the chair. You're giving her a Korean name, he said. His voice was careful, not claiming anything, just observing. I'm giving her her name, Amara said. It was always going to be that name. I just didn't know it yet. He did not say anything else. He did not need to. They stayed in the NICU for 37 minutes. The nurse on duty, a calm young woman named Patricia, who wore her hair in 2 braids and spoke to the babies the same way she spoke to the parents, directly, warmly, without condescension, explained Seo Yeon's current status with the precision of someone who understood that parents of NICU babies needed facts, not softening. The lungs were working. The feeding tube was doing what it needed to do. The monitors showed what they wanted to see. 2 weeks was still the estimate, possibly less if she continued progressing. She's stubborn, Patricia said. Not as a complaint, as a compliment. Amara looked at her daughter through the acrylic. Yeah, she said. I wonder where she gets that. On the way back to the room, in the elevator, Min-jae said, Seo Yeon Whitfield. It was not a question. It was him confirming what he had understood. Yes, Amara said. A pause. That's right, he said quietly. She did not respond to that. But she noted it. The absence of negotiation in him, the absence of the instinct to push for his name on the name. It was a small thing. It was not a small thing. Her mother flew in from Atlanta the next morning. She arrived at the hospital with one carry-on and the expression of a woman who has been holding herself together across a 4-hour flight through sheer will. And when she walked into Amara's room and saw her daughter sitting up in the hospital bed, tired and in pain and alive and present, she crossed the room and held her without saying anything for a long time. Amara let herself be held. She had not done that, not really, since before Soul. When her mother pulled back, she looked at her daughter's face with the thoroughness of someone taking inventory. "You need sleep," she said. "I know. Real sleep, not hospital sleep." "Mama?" "I'm just noting it." Then her mother turned and saw Min Jae, who had stood up from the chair in the corner of the room when she came in. He was standing with his hands at his sides, not stiff, but not relaxed either, in the particular posture of someone who understands they are being assessed and accepts it. Her mother looked at him for a long moment. He met her gaze. "You're Min Jae," she said. "Yes, ma'am." She looked at him the way mothers look at people who have hurt their children, with a completeness of attention that takes in everything and forgives nothing automatically, and extends a provisional, conditional, watchful neutrality only because her daughter is in the room and her daughter is watching and her daughter would not want a scene. "My granddaughter is in the NICU," she said. "Yes, ma'am." "I'm going to see her." "I'll take you," he said, "if you'd like." Her mother looked at him for another beat. Then she said, "All right." Amara watched them leave the room together. Her mother and the man who had done the thing he had done and was now pushing a NICU visitor badge into his pocket and walking down the corridor beside a woman who had every reason to despise him. And she lay back against the hospital pillow and felt something shift in her chest. Not resolution, not forgiveness, just the very strange and very specific experience of watching two parts of her life exist in the same corridor. They were gone for 40 minutes. When her mother came back alone, she sat in the chair Min Jae had vacated, and she looked at Amara with the expression she had when she had made up her mind about something and was deciding how to say it. "She's beautiful," her mother said. "About Seo Yeon." "I know. He cried in there." Her mother said it simply, as information. Amara looked at her. "Not performing," her mother said. "Just crying. Trying not to. Not succeeding." She folded her hands in her lap. "I'm not telling you what to do with that. I'm telling you what I saw." "Okay," Amara said. "What he did was wrong," her mother said. "I know. I don't know if wrong is a big enough word for it." Her mother's voice had something in it that was old and certain and not interested in prettiness. "What he took from you. You're right to decide. That's not something you just—" She stopped, breathed. "But I've also been alive long enough to know that people are not just the worst thing they've done. And I've been alive long enough to know that raising a child alone when you don't have to is not automatically the righteous choice. It's just the harder one." Amara looked at her mother. "I'm not telling you to take him back," her mother said. "I wouldn't tell you that. I'm telling you to take your time and not make permanent decisions out of pain that might not be permanent." "I know, Mama." "Do you?" "Yes." Her mother looked at her for another moment. Then she unzipped her carry-on and produced from somewhere near the bottom a container of sweet potato pie wrapped in plastic wrap and a cold pack, which she set on the hospital tray table with the satisfaction of someone completing a mission. Amara stared at it. "You brought pie on the plane. The hospital food is going to be terrible." Amara looked at the pie. She looked at her mother. Something broke open in her chest that had been sealed for a very long time, and she laughed, a real laugh. Not controlled, not restrained, the kind that comes from somewhere below the ribcage and arrives without permission. And her mother smiled at her with the specific smile of a woman who has been waiting a long time to hear that sound. The 2 weeks in the NICU passed in the rhythm of hospitals, structured and irregular at once, divided into shifts and visiting hours, and the measured progress of small milestones. Seo Yeon gained 3 ounces by day 4. Her breathing steadied by day 6. She took to feeding with the concentrated ferocity of someone who had decided to make up for lost time, and Patricia told Amara on day 9 that she was ahead of schedule. Min Jae came every day. He did not stay long on the days Amara's mother was there. He understood, without being told, how to read those rooms. He came in the mornings, spent time in the NICU, brought food to Amara that was better than hospital food but not extravagant about it, and left before noon. He did not bring flowers. He did not bring gifts. He brought food and presents and then removed the presents when it was not needed. Amara noticed. She did not comment on it, but she noticed. On day 11, her mother flew back to Atlanta. She had a school year starting and responsibilities she had already stretched past their limits. At the airport drop-off, she held Amara for a long time again, and when she let go, she looked at her daughter and said, "Call me every day." "I will." "And Amara." Her mother put her hand on her cheek, brief and warm. "You built a whole life in a new city while you were pregnant, and while all of that was happening. Don't forget that when you're deciding what you're capable of." Amara pressed her mother's hand against her face for a moment. Then she let her go. Seo-yeon came home on day 14. She arrived in the Culver City apartment in an infant carrier, wrapped in a blanket Amara's mother had left behind, and she looked around at the apartment with the expression of someone reserving judgment. Amara stood in the middle of the living room with her daughter in her arms and felt the apartment reorganize itself around this new fact. This 5.5-pound fact, with the dark eyes and the strong fingers, and the specific, particular realness of a person who had not existed 14 days ago and now simply was. Min-jae had driven them from the hospital. He had put the car seat in correctly on the first attempt, which Amara had watched from 5 feet away with her arms crossed, prepared to correct him, not needing to. He had driven at a speed that suggested he had recalibrated his relationship with urgency. He had carried the hospital bag up to the apartment without being asked. At the door of the apartment, she had turned to him. "Thank you," she said, "for the last 2 weeks." He looked at her. "Thank you for calling me." A pause. "Do you want to come in?" she said. "For a little while?" He did not answer immediately. He was checking, she understood, whether she actually meant it or whether she was asking out of some residual social reflex. She meant it, and she could tell he was waiting to be sure. "Yes," he said. He stayed for 2 hours. He held Seo-yeon with the carefulness of someone handling something irreplaceable, which she was, and Amara sat on the couch across from him and watched the man who had broken something fundamental in her hold their daughter and navigate the experience of it. The weight of her, the small sounds she made, the way she grabbed his finger with her whole hand and held on with that unconscious, absolute grip that newborns have. His face did the thing she had seen in the NICU, the thing her mother had reported and she had not yet witnessed directly until now. It was not dramatic. It was just a man whose defenses had no application here, in the face of something this small and this real, and so they had simply lowered, and what was underneath them was something she recognized from the rarest moments of their time in Seoul, the version of him that existed when he was not managing anything. She watched that. She filed it away. When he stood to leave, he shifted Seo-yeon gently back into Amara's arms, with the precision of someone who has been paying close attention to how this is done correctly. He put on his jacket. He picked up his keys. At the door, he stopped. He turned back. "I want to tell you something," he said. "And then I'm going to go, and you don't have to respond to it." She waited. "I'm not going to stop working on what I understand about what I did," he said. "Not because I'm trying to demonstrate something for your benefit, because I understand now what it means that I did it. What it says about how I learned to see people. What it says about how I learned to see you." He stopped. His jaw was doing the thing it did when he was pressing down on something. "You were never a problem I was trying to solve. You were the first person in a long time who made me feel like a person. And I handled that by trying to make sure it couldn't be taken away, because that was the only way I knew how to protect things." He looked at her. "I know that's not an excuse. I know it doesn't give back what I took. I just need you to know that I understand what I took." The apartment was quiet. Seo-yeon made a small sound and resettled. "I hear you," Amara said. It was not forgiveness. It was not an opening. It was exactly what it was. Acknowledgement. The confirmation that what he had said had reached her. He nodded once. He left. She stood in the middle of her apartment with her daughter against her chest, and the door closed behind him, and the city going on outside the window in its usual indifferent way. And she felt the silence of the apartment settle around her, and for the first time in a very long time, the silence did not feel like a deficit. The months that followed were not a love story. They were something harder and more specific than that. Min-jae flew in every 2 weeks, on a schedule he maintained without exception. She could track his reliability the way you track weather, not because he announced himself, but because he simply appeared when he said he would, and did not appear when he hadn't said he would. He attended pediatric appointments. He learned to read Seo Yeon's hunger sounds from her general sounds, which took him 3 weeks, and which Amara watched him work at with the same focused attention he brought to everything, sitting in the corner of the living room in his expensive clothes studying his daughter, like she was a language he was determined to become fluent in. He did not pressure Amara. He did not ask questions about her personal life. He did not position himself as the answer to anything. When she was short with him, and there were days she was short with him, days when his presence in her apartment felt like a reminder of everything that had happened, and she could not fully separate him from the damage. He absorbed it without defending himself and did not make her pay for it later. She noticed that too. Grounded, her agency acquired its 5th client in the month Seo Yeon turned 3 months old. Jules, her contractor, became a full hire. She rented a small office space in Culver City, 3 rooms and a conference table, and a kitchen that perpetually smelled of the pour-over coffee Jules made with evangelical devotion. She went back to work part-time at 6 weeks postpartum, which everyone told her was too soon, and which she did anyway because the work helped her think, and because the agency was real and growing, and she had built it herself and it needed her. She and Min-jae fell into a shape that was not a relationship and was not nothing. It was its own specific thing, without a name that fit it perfectly. He was present and not intrusive. She was civil and not distant. They talked about Seo Yeon with the ease of 2 people who agreed on most things about her. They talked occasionally about other things. His therapy, which he discussed with the specific discomfort of someone still finding the language for it. Her agency, which he asked about with the interest of someone who had always respected her work. The investigation in Seoul, which had moved to a point of formal charges against 3 executives within his organization, and which he discussed with her openly for the first time, in a conversation that lasted 2 hours, and that she had not expected and that changed something between them. It was that conversation that marked the shift. They were sitting in her apartment on a Saturday afternoon. Seo Yeon was asleep. The late light came through the window at the angle that made the whole room golden. He had made tea because he had learned where she kept things, and he had made it correctly, which still slightly annoyed her because it removed a complaint she had been holding in reserve. He told her about the investigation, not the version his attorneys had given her, not the protective version, not the version shaped for her benefit. The real version. The full scope of what his organization had done, what he had known, what he had permitted, what he had looked away from in the years before she arrived and in the years since. He spoke without flinching from any of it. She listened without interrupting. When he finished, she said, "Why are you telling me this?" "Because you stayed in Seoul knowing it wasn't clean," he said. "And you deserve to know the actual shape of what you were adjacent to, not a managed version, the real one." She looked at him. "Also," he said, quieter, "because I don't want there to be things you don't know, not anymore. I spent a year managing what you knew. I'm done with that." She held his gaze for a moment. "What happens to the organization?" she said. "I'm restructuring it, formally, legitimately. It's going to cost me—" He stopped, made a brief, humorless expression. "A significant amount. And some people who have been with me for a long time are going to prison, and I am going to have to live with the part I played in that." He looked at his hands. "Jin Woo-han says that's part of the work, living with the part you played without trying to rewrite it." Jin Woo-han sounds like a wise person. "He is." A pause. "He also told me about 6 months ago that I was in love with you in a way I didn't know how to have without trying to own it. He said that was the work, learning to have it differently." The room was very quiet. Outside, someone was mowing a lawn somewhere nearby, the sound of it ordinary and persistent. "Min-jae," she said. He looked at her. "I'm not where you are," she said. "I need you to know that clearly. What you feel and what I feel right now are not the same thing. There are days when I see you walk through my door and I feel the anger of what you did before I feel anything else. I need you to know that's still true." "I know," he said. "And I'm telling you that because I think you deserve honesty more than you deserve comfort," she said. "Not because I'm trying to hurt you." "I know that too." She looked at the table between them. The tea. The ordinary Saturday afternoon. The sound of the lawnmower. "But I'm also not where I was 8 months ago," she said. And I think you know that." He was quiet. "What happened to me?" she said carefully. "What you did to me. I've had to sit inside that for a long time. The loss of choice. The understanding that the man I trusted had made a decision that should have been mine and taken it without asking. I've had to understand what that means about what I want from people, from relationships, from the rest of my life." She paused. "And what I've come to is that I cannot go back. There's no version of us that goes back to before, and I wouldn't trust it if there was." He nodded. He had expected this. "But maybe," she said, and her voice was slower now, more careful, the words chosen with the precision of someone who has been living inside this thought for a long time and is finally saying it out loud for the first time. "There's a version that goes forward. That's different, that I'm building on my terms, with my eyes open, without pretending the past didn't happen." She met his eyes. "Not a second chance. A first chance at something that has never existed before." He looked at her. There was something in his face that she had not seen there before. Not exactly. Not the controlled emotion of a man managing his reaction. Just a man sitting with something he had not allowed himself to fully want, because wanting it had felt like something he hadn't earned. "I would spend the rest of my life earning that," he said quietly. "I know," she said. "That's part of why I'm saying it." She picked up her tea. She drank it. It had gone slightly cool, but he had made it correctly, and she was not going to mention the temperature. "There are conditions," she said. "Tell me." "Therapy. Not as a temporary thing. Ongoing, as long as it needs to be." "Already happening." "The legal agreement we have about Seo-Yan doesn't change. I remain primary. Full stop." "Agreed." "You never again make a decision that is mine to make," she said. "Not a small one. Not what you think is a practical one. Not one you believe is for my protection or our benefit. If it's my decision, you ask. Every time." He held her gaze. "Every time," he said. "And if you break that," she said, "any part of that, this conversation never happened. We go back to co-parents and nothing more." "I understand. I need to hear you say it like you mean it, not like you're agreeing to terms." He was quiet for a moment. She could see him move past the automatic response to the real one. "I understand what I lose if I break it," he said, not as a threat, as a fact. "I understand it." She looked at him. She believed him. Not blindly, not with the belief of a woman who has decided the past didn't happen. With the belief of a woman who has watched a person for 8 months in the specific conditions of crisis and grief and accountability, and who has observed, carefully, whether what he says matches what he does. It had so far. Imperfectly in places. Consistently in the ways that mattered. She was 31 years old. She was running a growing company in a city that had not known she existed 14 months ago. She had a daughter who was strong and fierce and was currently asleep in the next room with the specific confidence of a person who has made it through the first hard thing and has decided the rest is manageable. She was not the woman who had landed in Seoul 2 years ago, looking for a new beginning without being sure what she was moving toward. She knew what she was moving toward now. She had built it herself, with her own hands, out of the wreckage of someone else's decision. That was not nothing. That was everything. In the evening, after Seo-Yan woke from her nap and demanded to be fed with her characteristic urgency, after Amara nursed her and Min-jae sat nearby, and they talked about the pediatric appointment scheduled for next week, and the question of whether Grounded needed a second contractor or a full-time account manager, after the ordinary business of the evening proceeded in its ordinary way, Min-jae stood at the door to leave, and he looked at Amara holding their daughter, and he said nothing. He did not need to say anything. She looked at him. She nodded once, small, the kind of nod that is not a grand gesture and is not meant to be. He left. She stood in the apartment with Seo-Yan against her chest and listened to his footsteps in the corridor and the elevator at the end of the hall, and then the building going quiet again. She walked to the window. The parking structure was there. It was always there. It had stopped bothering her months ago, and now it was just a thing she knew, like she knew the sound of the pipes in the building and the specific hour the neighbor's television went off at night, and the angle of the late light through the glass. Seo-Yan made a sound against her shoulder. Not distress. Just announcement. Just, "I am here. Are you paying attention?" "I'm paying attention," Amara said. She looked out at the city. The lights were coming on as the dark settled in, the way they did every night, thousands of them, Each one somebody's window, somebody's ordinary evening, somebody's life going forward in whatever direction it was going. She had not predicted any of this. Not the leaving, not the pregnancy, not the investigation, the altered documents, the attorney in Century City, the NICU, the Saturday afternoon conversation over cooling tea. She had not predicted that she would be standing at a window in Culver City at 31 years old with her daughter on her chest and the outline of a future that did not look like any future she had planned. She had also not predicted that she would feel, standing here, something that was not quite peace and not quite joy, but was in the same neighborhood as both. Something that had the quality of ground under her feet. Solid. Hers. Not given to her, not arranged for her, not secured by someone else's decision about what she needed. Built. By her. Out of what was actually true. She pressed her cheek against the top of Seo-yeon's head. Her daughter smelled like something that had no name yet, just warmth and realness, the specific scent of a person who is entirely new. The city went on being itself outside the window. Amara stood in it, in the life she had made and breathed. In Seoul, months later, the formal sentencing in the Kong Holdings investigation concluded with 3 executives receiving prison terms and the organization paying a financial settlement that Min Jae's attorneys had negotiated over 14 months. The restructuring was real and costly and complete. There were people in Seoul who said it had weakened him. There were people who said he had made the choice deliberately, that he had used the investigation as the mechanism to do what he had needed to do for years, and had lacked the clean break to initiate. Only Jin Woo-han knew the full truth, and Jin Woo-han did not talk. What was true was that Min Jae-kong at 40 years old was a different shape than he had been at 38. Smaller in the ways that had to do with empire and reach, larger in the ways that were harder to see. He kept his bi-weekly schedule to Los Angeles without exception for the first year, and then moved it to weekly, and then, in the early spring of the following year, filed the paperwork for a part-time residential address in Culver City, 2 blocks from Amara's apartment. Not in her apartment, 2 blocks away. She had been the one to find this place, actually. She had sent him the listing with a message that said, "This is 2 blocks away, and the landlord is reasonable, and Seo-yeon is starting to walk, and she should be able to get to you faster than a 14-hour flight." He had read the message and then called her. "You found me an apartment," he said. "I sent you a listing," she said. "Those are different things." Why? She was quiet for a moment, not because she didn't know the answer, because she was deciding how much of the answer to say. "Because Seo-yeon deserves a father who is present," she said, "and because—" She stopped, started again. "Because I've been watching you for a year. And what I've watched is someone doing the work without asking to be recognized for it. And I think that deserves something." A pause. "What does it deserve?" he said quietly. "Proximity," she said. 2 blocks of it. To start. He moved in 6 weeks later. They did not announce it. There was nothing to announce. It was a man who lived 2 blocks from the mother of his daughter in a city he had begun to know through the specific geography of her life. The Thai place, the grocery store, the pediatric office, the coffee shop where he sometimes met her between her morning client calls and Seo-yeon's nap window. They were not together by the definition that requires a word for it. They were something the word hadn't caught up with yet. The evening Amara finally understood that they had crossed from one thing into another was not dramatic. It was a Tuesday in April. Seo Yan was 14 months old and had been walking for 6 weeks and had recently developed the habit of walking directly into furniture with the confidence of someone who had not yet accepted that furniture was solid. Amara had been on calls all day. Minji had picked Seo Yan up from the babysitter and brought her back to Amara's apartment and given her dinner and was sitting on the floor with her when Amara got off her last call at 7:15 and walked into the living room. She stopped in the doorway. He was on the floor with their daughter, who had fallen asleep against his leg, with the complete abandon of a child who has decided this is a safe place and has no further questions about it. He was not on his phone. He was not doing anything. I was just sitting in the low light of the living room with his daughter asleep against him, very still, the way people are still when they are afraid of waking something. He looked up when she came in. She looked at him on her floor, in her apartment, with their daughter. She thought about the night in Seoul when she had woken at 2 in the morning and found him sitting at the kitchen table with a glass of water. The 20 minutes of silence that had felt, even then, like something complete. She thought about the pregnancy test on his desk and the 4 seconds of silence before the worst thing. She thought about the parking structure outside her window and the cooling tea and the 2 blocks and all the mornings he had appeared when he said he would. She thought about what it had cost her to be here, what it had cost her to choose, with full knowledge of the cost, to stay in motion towards something instead of standing still in the wreckage. She walked across the room. She sat down on the floor beside him, careful not to wake Seo Yan, close enough that their shoulders were nearly touching. He looked at her. She looked at their daughter's sleeping face. "She has your jaw," she said quietly. "She has your expression," he said. "The one you make when you've decided something and you're waiting for everyone else to catch up." Amara looked at her daughter. Seo Yeon's face, in sleep, was perfectly open. The expression of someone who has not yet learned to close anything off, who takes the world at full face value and rests in it without negotiation. "I'm not going to pretend I'm not scared," Amara said. To the room, to him, to the version of herself that had been holding this admission at arm's length for several months. "Of what we're doing, whatever this is." "I know," he said. "I need you to know it's not about trust in the abstract," she said. "It's about the specific thing you did and the specific way it changed how I move through the world. That doesn't disappear. I'm not telling you it disappears. I don't expect it to. But I'm choosing this anyway," she said, "with that knowledge. That's what's different." She looked at him. "The first time I fell into it without seeing clearly. This time I'm walking in with my eyes open. And that matters to me. That's mine." He held her gaze. "It's yours," he said. They sat on the floor of her apartment in the quiet of a Tuesday evening while their daughter slept between them, or rather against him, in the specific fearlessness of early childhood, and the city went on outside the window, and nothing was resolved in the way that stories resolve, with clean lines and settled accounts. What was true was true. The damage had been real. The work had been real. The choice, made with eyes open and fear present and full knowledge of what it had cost to arrive here, that was real too. Seo-yeon shifted in her sleep and made a small sound and resettled, her hand finding Min-jae's and holding it with that unconscious absolute grip. And Amara watched her daughter hold her father's hand in the low light of the living room, and she let herself feel, without managing it, without filing it away, the full complicated weight of where she was. It was not simple. It was not safe. It was hers. She breathed out. The night settled around them, and the city lights came on one by one through the window, and somewhere in Culver City a lawnmower stopped, and a neighbor's television went quiet, and a child slept on her father's leg, while her mother sat beside them and chose, with everything she knew, to stay.